The smell of smoke is what you notice first. A faint, acrid whisper that curls under the door and tickles the back of your throat. A scent that has no business being inside your home at 2 a.m. It's the smell of a campfire gone wrong, of a forgotten candle, of a life about to be irrevocably split into before and after. For me that night it was the smell of my neighbor, Mr. Henderson, and his latest, most catastrophic attempt to purge the negative energies from his property, a mission that would see my world turn to ash and embers, and lead to a lawsuit so audacious it would redefine the very meaning of neighborly dispute. But let me rewind a little, because to understand the sheer, breathtaking insanity of him trying to sue me for the fire he started, you have to understand the man, the myth, the legend that was Arthur Henderson. My name is Ben Carter, and for 5 years I lived in what I thought was a quiet, unassuming suburban cul-de-sac. It was the kind of place where the biggest scandal was someone forgetting to bring their recycling bins in on time. My wife Sarah and I had poured every ounce of our savings and our souls into our little 2-story colonial. It wasn't just a house. It was the backdrop to our dreams. The scuff mark on the hardwood floor near the kitchen was from the day we moved in, dragging our heavy oak table. The slightly lopsided swing on the porch was where I'd proposed to Sarah on a rain-soaked April evening. The nursery, painted a soft, buttery yellow, was waiting for the child we hoped to bring home one day. It was a home filled with the quiet, comfortable hum of a life being built, brick by emotional brick. Next door, separated by a narrow strip of lawn and a rickety old fence that had seen better days, lived Arthur Henderson. He was a man in his late 60s with a wild shock of white hair that perpetually looked like he'd just been struck by lightning, and eyes that held a glint of either genius or madness, you could never quite tell which. He was a retired, or so he claimed, professor of metaphysical energetics, a field I'm relatively certain he invented. His house was a labyrinth of piled-up newspapers, obscure scientific journals, and what he called his experiments. Our first introduction was him welcoming us with a homemade device he claimed could harmonize the neighborhood's biorhythms using tuned crystals and the resonant frequency of bee humming. Sarah, ever the diplomat, had accepted it with a gracious smile and placed it in the garage where it collected dust next to my fishing gear. For the first year, his eccentricities were more amusing than alarming. There was the sonic weed deterrent that emitted a high-pitched whine only dogs and, apparently, the miller's toddler could hear. There was the week he tried to power his entire house with a complex system of potatoes and copper wires. We'd smile and wave, and sometimes we'd hear a faint pop or see a flash of green light from his backyard shed, and we'd just chalk it up to another Henderson endeavor. He was our neighborhood character, a harmless if slightly odd fixture. But then things began to shift. The experiments grew louder, more frequent and more concerning. The pleasant, if nonsensical, chatter about energy vortices was replaced by dark mutterings about psychic intrusions and negative thought forms. He started accusing the mailman of implanting subliminal messages in his utility bills. He claimed the squirrels in our oak tree were government surveillance drones. We tried reasoning with him. We tried kindness. We even suggested gently that he might want to talk to someone. But each attempt was met with a wall of paranoid suspicion. The final straw, the one that lit the fuse, so to speak, was his new project, the atmospheric negativity incinerator. He explained it to me one afternoon, his eyes blazing with fervor as I was mowing my lawn. You see, Ben, the problem with modern society is the buildup of psychic detritus, he proclaimed, waving a screwdriver for emphasis. Anger, envy, sorrow, it all lingers in the air, a toxic smog. My device will create a controlled harmonic combustion field that will safely burn away these negative particles, leaving the atmosphere pure and clean. It sounded frankly unhinged. Arthur, that sounds incredibly dangerous, I said, trying to keep my voice level. You're talking about open combustion in a residential area, with wooden houses 30 feet away, he scoffed. Small-minded. You're trapped in a Newtonian paradigm. This is quantum cleansing. It's perfectly safe. I've calculated the resonance frequency of malice. It's 437 hertz, in case you were wondering. I wasn't. I went inside and told Sarah, and we shared a look of profound unease. That evening, I called the non-emergency police line. The officer who came out was polite but dismissive. "Yeah, we know Mr. Henderson," he said with a weary sigh. "As long as he's not creating a public nuisance or a direct fire hazard, there's not much we can do. He's just eccentric, a direct fire hazard." The words would echo in my mind for weeks to come. We started sleeping a little less soundly. The sight of Arthur hauling what looked like a repurposed water heater and several propane tanks into his backyard did nothing to ease our anxiety. Sarah started having a recurring dream about flying embers. I found myself checking the weather forecast for wind conditions more often than a sea captain. The night it happened was unnervingly still. There was no wind, a fact I would later turn over and over in my mind. If there had been a breeze, perhaps the embers would have scattered harmlessly, or perhaps the fire would have spread faster. There's no way to know. Sarah was away visiting her sister for the weekend. I was alone watching a late-night movie when that first faint scent of smoke reached me. I dismissed it at first, thinking maybe someone had a fireplace going. But it grew stronger, thicker, carrying with it the distinct chemical tang of burning plastic. I got up and walked to the window overlooking Arthur's property. What I saw sent a jolt of pure adrenaline through my system. A tall makeshift chimney, cobbled together from stovepipe and what looked like a satellite dish, was protruding from his shed. From its top, a torrent of brilliant orange sparks was shooting into the night sky, a fountain of fireflies against the velvet black. And from the base of the shed I saw the first hungry tongues of flame licking at the dry, weathered wood. "Arthur," I yelled, already grabbing my phone and dialing 911. I didn't even wait for the dispatcher to answer before I was sprinting out my front door and across the lawn. I could feel the heat already, a palpable wall of it. "Arthur, your shed is on fire." He emerged from his back door, not in panic, but with a look of intense, almost religious concentration. He was holding a clipboard. "Nonsense, Ben. The combustion field is merely achieving optimal resonance. The readings are magnificent." "Arthur, it's not a field, it's a fire," I screamed, the 911 operator, now a frantic voice in my ear. I gave her the address, my voice cracking with urgency. "You have to get out of there." But he just stood there, scribbling on his clipboard, as the fire took hold of the shed with a sound like a roaring beast. The old dried timber went up like kindling. Within what felt like seconds, the flames had jumped the gap to the fence. I watched, helpless and horrified, as a tendril of fire snaked across the top rail and found purchase in the dry shingles of my garden shed. From there, it was a race that the fire was destined to win. The rest of the night was a blur of screaming sirens, shouting firefighters, and the terrifying crackle of my home being consumed. I stood on the sidewalk, wrapped in a coarse wool blanket a paramedic had given me, and watched as the house Sarah and I had built our life in was devoured. I saw the porch swing, the one from my proposal, melt and drop into the inferno. I saw the nursery window explode outward, the buttery yellow curtains turning to black confetti. It was a physical pain, a hollowing out of my very being. The heat dried the tears on my face before they could even fall. Arthur was standing a little ways off, also wrapped in a blanket, still clutching his stupid clipboard. He looked confused, like a child who had been woken from a deep sleep. His house, thanks to the direction of the slight air current and the heroic efforts of the fire department, was only partially damaged. The shed was a total loss, and one side of his house was charred, but it was still standing. My house was a blackened, smoldering skeleton. The fire marshal's report was unequivocal. Cause of fire: Arthur Henderson's unauthorized and improperly constructed experimental device. Origin: shed on Henderson property. Point of ignition: direct flame and superheated embers. It was an open and shut case. Our insurance company, after their investigation, confirmed it. We were looking at a total loss, but we would be made whole. Financially, at least. The emotional toll, the loss of irreplaceable photos, letters, the quilt Sarah's grandmother had made for us, that was a different kind of debt. one that could never be repaid. We found a small rental house a few towns over and began the agonizing process of rebuilding our lives from scratch. The grief was a heavy, constant companion. Sarah would sometimes just stop in the middle of unpacking a box and cry, mourning the ghost of her home. I was consumed by a cold, hard anger toward Arthur. I couldn't even look at the man. His reckless, arrogant foolishness had stolen our sanctuary, and then 6 weeks after the fire, the letter arrived. It was a thick, official-looking envelope from a law firm I'd never heard of, Holloway and Finch. My first thought was that it was something related to the insurance claim. I opened it with Sarah looking over my shoulder, her hand resting on my arm for support. It wasn't from our insurance company. It was a formal notice of a civil lawsuit. The plaintiff was Arthur Henderson. He was suing me. I had to read the first paragraph 3 times before the words would arrange themselves into a coherent, comprehensible sentence. The document alleged that I, Benjamin Carter, through negligence and the creation of a psychic attractor field of profound negativity, had caused a catastrophic resonance feedback loop that destabilized his atmospheric negativity incinerator, leading to the fire that damaged his property. It claimed that my chronic skepticism and hostile mental projections constituted a form of psychic trespass, and that I was therefore liable for the damage to his shed, the scorched side of his house, the destruction of his experimental apparatus, and most breathtakingly, for extreme emotional distress and the theft of his intellectual property. He was asking for $2 million. I remember the sound that came out of my mouth wasn't a laugh or a cry, but something strangled and in between. Sarah snatched the papers from my hands, her eyes scanning the legalese, her face paling with each passing second. He's insane, she whispered, the papers trembling in her grasp. This can't be real. But it was. It was very, very real. The man who had burned down my house, who had destroyed every tangible piece of our past, was now trying to blame me for it in a court of law. The sheer monumental audacity of it was like a physical blow. My anger, which had been a slow-burning ember, erupted into a white-hot fury. This wasn't just about money. This was a new form of invasion, a legal gaslighting of epic proportions. He had taken our home, and now he was trying to take our future, our sanity, and our good name. Our lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Maria Rodriguez, assured us the case was frivolous. It's the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen, she said, shaking her head in disbelief. A judge will toss this out in 5 minutes. But the legal system, we learned, moves with the speed of continental drift. A motion to dismiss had to be filed, hearings had to be scheduled, and all the while the lawsuit hung over our heads like a toxic cloud, a constant stressful reminder of the insanity we were entangled in. Arthur's lawyer, a young, slick-looking man who seemed to have graduated from the bottom of his class, argued that his client's theories, while unconventional, were a sincerely held belief system and deserved their day in court. The day of the hearing for the motion to dismiss arrived. The courtroom was a stark, formal place, all polished wood and solemn silence. Arthur sat at the plaintiff's table, dressed in a surprisingly decent suit, his white hair tamed for once. He looked confident, almost serene. I sat with Maria, my hands clenched into fists under the table. Sarah was in the front row of the gallery, her expression a mask of tense anxiety. The judge, an older woman with a stern, intelligent face and a no-nonsense demeanor, took the bench. She listened as Arthur's lawyer presented his argument, spinning, a tale of psychic energies and vibrational trespass with a straight face. He presented Arthur's research, reams of paper filled with complex-looking but utterly nonsensical equations and diagrams. He argued that my persistent negative aura was a documented, if not widely understood, phenomenon. Then it was Maria's turn. She was brilliant. She systematically dismantled their argument not by debating the existence of psychic auras, but by focusing on the established, tangible laws of physics and civil liability. "Your Honor," she said, her voice clear and cutting, "the plaintiff is asking this court to not only validate a belief system that has no basis in established science or law, but to hold my client responsible for the plaintiff's own reckless actions. He built an unpermitted dangerous combustion device in a residential neighborhood. The fire marshal's report is clear. The cause was physical flame and embers, not a negative thought form. To allow this case to proceed would be to open the floodgates to every manner of fantastical and unprovable claim." The judge listened intently, her eyes moving from Maria to Arthur's lawyer, her expression unreadable. When both sides had finished, she steepled her fingers and was silent for a long, tense moment. I held my breath. This was it. This was where sanity would be restored. "Motion denied," the judge said, her voice calm and firm. A cold dread washed over me. I felt Sarah gasp behind me. Maria's professional composure cracked for a fraction of a second, a flicker of disbelief in her eyes. The judge continued. "While the court finds the plaintiff's theories highly speculative and outside mainstream scientific thought, the standard for a motion to dismiss is whether the plaintiff has stated a claim upon which relief could be granted if all alleged facts are taken as true. The plaintiff has alleged a set of facts, however unusual, that he claims led to his damages. The question of whether his beliefs have any basis in reality and whether they can be proven is a matter for summary judgment or for a finder of fact at trial. The motion to dismiss is denied. The case will proceed to discovery." Arthur shot me a look of pure, unadulterated triumph. He had done it. He had forced his madness into the sober, rational world of the law, and the law, in its infinite and sometimes idiotic wisdom, had allowed it. We were going to trial. The crazy was going to have its day in court. The months that followed were a special kind of hell. Discovery was a circus of the absurd. We were deposed for hours, forced to answer questions about our mental state, our attitudes toward Mr. Henderson, and whether we had ever practiced directed negative visualization. We had to hand over personal journals, emails, and text messages, which Arthur's lawyer scoured for any hint of malicious intent. It was invasive, demeaning, and emotionally exhausting. The stress began to wear on Sarah and me in ways we had never experienced. We were snapping at each other over trivial things. The shared grief over our home was now compounded by a shared simmering rage at the injustice of it all. Our insurance company was furious. They were on the hook for our rebuild, and now they were facing the cost of a protracted legal battle to defend against this ludicrous suit. Their lawyers were confident we would win at trial, but a trial was a year away, and the cost, both financial and emotional, was mounting. It was during this dark time that I hit my lowest point. I was at the local hardware store buying supplies for a small repair at our rental when I saw Arthur. He was in the gardening section, examining a bag of fertilizer with the same intense concentration he'd given his clipboard the night of the fire. A red haze descended over my vision. All the anger, the frustration, the sheer helplessness I had felt for months boiled over. I started toward him, my hands curling into fists, a torrent of angry words building in my throat. I wanted to confront him, to scream in his face, to make him feel a fraction of the pain he had caused us. But I stopped. I saw my reflection in the glass door of a tool cabinet. I saw a man I barely recognized, gaunt, eyes shadowed with anger and sleeplessness, his posture rigid with fury. This wasn't me. This was what this situation, what Arthur, was turning me into. I thought of Sarah, of the life we were trying to rebuild, of the family we still hoped to have. If I gave in to this anger, if I confronted him in a public place, I would be proving his point. I would be the hostile, negative neighbor he was claiming me to be. I would be feeding the very narrative he had constructed. I turned around and walked away. It was the hardest thing I had ever done. But in that moment of walking away, a clarity settled over me. We couldn't beat him by playing his game. We couldn't out-argue crazy in a courtroom on his terms. We had to change the game entirely. That night I talked to Sarah. We can't keep fighting this as a legal battle, I said. He's not using the law to seek justice. He's using it as another one of his experiments. It's another device, and we're the negative energy he's trying to incinerate. We have to stop feeding it. But what else can we do? She asked, her voice thick with exhaustion. We can't just let him win. Maybe winning isn't about the judge's gavel, I said. A new idea, fragile and terrifying, beginning to form in my mind. Maybe it's about something else entirely. I called Maria the next day and laid out my plan. She was predictably horrified. Ben, that is a massive, massive risk. You're essentially proposing we lay down our legal shields. The court could rule against you by default. Not if we reframe the entire issue, I argued, the idea gaining strength as I spoke. We don't fight his reality. We don't even acknowledge it. We present our own, but not with anger, with something else. It took days of passionate, frantic discussion to convince her, and to convince the insurance company's legal team. They thought I had lost my mind as well, but I was adamant. I was tired of being a victim of his chaos. It was time to take back control, not through force, but through a radical, almost foolish act of something. I didn't have a word for it yet. The day of the trial finally arrived. The courtroom was packed. News of the psychic negligence lawsuit had spread, turning our personal nightmare into a local spectacle. Reporters were in the back, and the gallery was filled with curious onlookers and a few of our shell-shocked neighbors. Arthur sat at his table, looking like a prophet ready to testify. He had stacks of his research and had even brought a small crystalline device he claimed could measure aura density. The judge called the court to order. Arthur's lawyer stood to give his opening statement. It was a masterpiece of pseudo-scientific gibberish, full of quantum entanglement of consciousness and psychokinetic interference patterns. He painted me as a vortex of negativity whose toxic thoughts had literally broken Arthur's machine. It was absurd, but he delivered it with such earnest conviction that I saw a few people in the gallery nodding thoughtfully. Then it was Maria's turn. She stood, but instead of launching into a point-by-point refutation, she walked to the center of the courtroom and faced the judge. Your Honor, she began, her voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the room. This case is not about psychic auras or vibrational frequencies. It is not about the validity of Mr. Henderson's beliefs. This case is about two things and two things only: responsibility and compassion. She paused, letting the words hang in the air. My clients Ben and Sarah Carter lost everything. Their home, their cherished possessions, the physical repository of their memories and their love, was destroyed in a fire that originated from Mr. Henderson's property. The cause was a physical fire started by a physical device. That is an indisputable fact. They have endured that loss with a grief that is profound and personal. She turned and gestured toward Arthur. Mr. Henderson has also suffered a loss. He has lost his sense of security, his peace of mind, and the fruits of his own intellectual passions. He is seeking an explanation for a traumatic event, and he has constructed a complex and deeply personal narrative to make sense of it. My clients understand that. They understand what it is to search for meaning in the ashes. I felt a lump form in my throat. Sarah reached over and took my hand, her grip tight. For months, Maria continued, my clients have been fighting this lawsuit. They have been angry, they have been hurt, they have been defensive, and who could blame them? But they have come to realize that fighting anger with anger, Fighting one bizarre narrative with another only creates more of the very negativity that has plagued this situation from the beginning. She walked back to our table and picked up a single sheet of paper. Therefore, Your Honor, after long and careful consideration, and against my own initial legal advice, my clients have instructed me to do the following. The courtroom was utterly silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Arthur was leaning forward, his brow furrowed in confusion. First, Maria said, we will not be presenting a defense against the claims of psychic negligence. We concede that we cannot prove, within Mr. Henderson's personal belief system, that we did not project negative energy. A ripple of shock went through the room. Arthur's lawyer's jaw actually dropped. Second, Maria went on, her voice growing stronger. While we maintain that we bear no legal liability for the fire, we acknowledge that our neighbor has suffered. And as our neighbor, we feel a human responsibility to help him heal, just as we are trying to heal ourselves. She placed the paper on the clerk's desk. This is a formal, legally binding offer. Ben and Sarah Carter offer to withdraw all their own potential counterclaims against Mr. Henderson. Furthermore, they offer to pay for the repair of the physical damage to his house, the scorched siding and the destroyed shed, up to a value of $50,000, to be overseen by a licensed contractor of their choosing. This offer is made not as an admission of guilt or liability, but as a gesture of neighborly goodwill and a desire to end this cycle of blame and pain. It is an offer to rebuild, not just houses, but a relationship. We ask that you consider this offer as a resolution to this case. The silence that followed was profound. The judge looked from Maria to me and Sarah, her expression one of deep contemplation. Arthur looked utterly bewildered. His entire case, his entire worldview was built on the premise of a battle, of him against my negative force. We had just taken away the enemy. We had surrendered, but it was a surrender that felt more powerful than any victory. The judge adjourned the court for 1 hour to consider the offer. When we returned, her decision was swift. The court commends the defendants for their extraordinary and compassionate proposal, she said. It is a rare and commendable act to seek peace over being proven right. The plaintiff's lawsuit is based on a theory that this court finds has no legal merit. However, the defendant's offer provides a tangible path to resolution and healing for both parties. Therefore, the court, in the interest of justice and judicial economy, hereby dismisses the plaintiff's complaint with prejudice, on the condition that the defendant's offer is accepted and executed in full. Case dismissed. It was over, just like that. The battle we had been fighting for over a year was gone, not with a bang, but with a quiet, stunning act of grace. Arthur stood up. He looked at the crystalline device on his table, then at me. The triumph was gone from his eyes, replaced by a deep, profound confusion. He had tried to soothe the negativity out of me, and in response I had offered him kindness. It was a variable his equations could not compute. We didn't speak to him as we left the courtroom. The reporters swarmed, but we had nothing to say. We went home to our small rental, exhausted but lighter than we had felt in a very, very long time. The repairs on Arthur's house began a month later. We hired a good crew, and they did a professional job. The new siding was a slightly different color, a permanent reminder of what had happened. We never got an apology from Arthur. He mostly stayed inside while the work was being done. But about a week after the construction was finished, I came home to find a small, clumsily wrapped package on our rental's front porch. There was no note. Inside was one of his homemade biorhythm harmonizers. This one was different, though. The crystals inside were clear, not the murky green of the one he'd given us years before. It was, I realized, his version of an olive branch. Our new house was finished 6 months later. It was beautiful, modern, and filled with new memories, but it was just a house. The home was what Sarah and I had managed to preserve and rebuild within ourselves. We had learned that you can't fight fire with fire. You just get a bigger, more destructive blaze. The only way to truly extinguish the flames of anger and blame is with an unexpected downpour of grace. Arthur Henderson burned my house down, and then he tried to sue me. In the end, he taught me the most valuable lesson of my life. That the strongest foundation you can build for your future isn't made of wood and concrete, but of forgiveness and the courage to walk away from a fight you don't need to win. The ashes of the old house are gone now, but the lesson they taught us is the cornerstone of everything we have become.